All right. So, progress news for this week. Let's start with some green energy transition figures. The International Energy Agency is forecasting that in 2024, 1 in 5 cars sold worldwide is going to be electric, which doesn't sound like that much until you also know that in 2020, it was 1 in 25. So, an
Wow.
astounding uptick in the last 4 years of electric cars.
Wow.
In the US, Bloomberg reported that there's now one fast charging EV station for every 15 gas stations. So, not a lot, but more than you might expect.
Yeah, that's always been my, along with a gazillion other people's, main issue / question of, where do you charge if you're driving longer distances? Now, it is also true in the United States and in most parts of the world that the vast preponderance of people in their cars stay within something like a 60-mile or 50-mile radius on a regular basis. And therefore, a 300-mile range for a plug-in vehicle is vastly more than adequate for any daily needs, meaning you're almost never going to expend a daily charge before you get somewhere. But in larger open space countries where people actually are going to do drives of 2, 3, 4, 500 miles, let alone 1,000, that whole charging issue definitely becomes much more acute.
Well, I guess nobody wanted to put a bunch of money into charging stations, and then it turns out that no one wanted to buy electric cars. This is a little bit like which comes first, the chicken or the egg,
Right. It's that's the catch-22. Like, I don't want to buy an electric car without a charging station. Well, I don't want to build a charging station unless you're going to buy an electric car. So that clearly is working itself out as the demand accelerates and the need increases.
I think the number was between 8,500 and 9,000 of the fast charging EV stations in the States now. It's more than I would have expected, to be honest. Yeah. There's a really fascinating piece in the Atlantic that I would love to point people to, which is about how bone marrow transplants, or the prospects of someone finding a bone marrow transplant donor, has changed dramatically, and probably with almost zero notice. There was a drug, I believe in the 90s, but they had not realized that it could be used for this until relatively recently. It's called cyclophosphamide. And essentially what it does is that you need to find an exact match for a blood marrow donor. And this drug allows them to open up their prospects. So if they take the drug, the transplant can happen regardless of whether the bone marrow donor only has, let's say, 3 out of the 10 markers needed rather than 10 out of 10. So if somebody doesn't find an exact match, or they have one exact match in the entire world, it used to be like, that's it. It's kind of, game over. And that is no longer the case, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, even when you were an exact match, you still had to take intensive amounts of drugs to make your body not reject the transplant as a foreign, like, alien. I had 2 friends who had rare diseases, both of whom had transplants, and then both of whom died because their body didn't accept it. So, even when you found that exact match, which was rare, it was almost always a sibling or a relative. It's very hard to find an exact match just kind of randomly in the universe. If we get to the point where we are both able to expand meaningfully the number of donors and also reduce the body's natural tendency to attack, that's a total game changer for all of this.
Yeah, I don't know if there have been advances about the drugs, drugs to help you not attack the foreign object. I do know that what's been so wild about, like, the pig kidney transplants and the pig liver transplants and all that wild stuff that they've been up to in the last year or so, and those patients actually surviving for a few months, would suggest to me that they've been able to figure out something that has been a bit of a game changer on that front. But, well, I don't know. That's a big question mark.
Anyway, this is just like one of the other many examples of radical breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs. And this is an area we should probably do a show this year on this, of where the promise of artificial intelligence, just being able to go through multiple scenarios, different proteins, different ways the body reacts, the promise of that as an enhancement tool to making these discoveries is really substantial, as opposed to all the other areas where people are worried about the risks of AI.
Absolutely. Not to mention, the mRNA personalized cancer vaccines. Now they're finding that there might be long-acting drugs that you can take for HIV, tuberculosis, and other diseases. There's just a vast field of medical breakthroughs that I think doesn't get a lot of play outside of the science world.
Yep.